Late 2019, I found myself in Bangkok, Thailand yet again. I have been here many times. I have seen the grandiose palace, the tranquil temples, and the bustling markets. So I decided to do something different. I wanted to get out of the city, and I chose Kanchanaburi, and it turned out to be one of the best experiences I have ever had. 4 hours of lazy train ride directly dropped me off at the historic River Kwai Bridge. This is the inspiration of the famous Battle over the River Kwai, an Oscar-awarded film that I highly recommend you to take a look. And it happened to be the yearly River Kwai Bridge Festival, when the bridge is decorated in its historic World War II style, converted into the front lines of a battleground, full of turrets, sandbags, and machine guns. At night, a complete reenactment of the battle over the River Kwai took place with drones as airplanes and fireworks as gunfire. And there cannot be a festival in Thailand without a humongous market. Right beside the bridge, I could find myself walking for hours on end, immersed in all kinds of food, shops, drink stands, and so much more. And oh boy, all the food. Food. There's food everywhere. And how can I possibly control myself when there's so many delicious options with prices lower than my standard? And there's more than just street food. There are a few very high-end restaurants that offer absolutely stunning views while providing meals of my dreams. As a result, I gained 1.5 chin during my 5 days in Thailand, and it was absolutely worth it. Yet the most prominent aspect of Kanchanaburi is actually the temples. So I rented a motorcycle for less than $2 a day and explored around the region. For example, this temple buried deep underground in a complicated cave system. Or this temple that is shaped like a dragon, and as you slowly climb the hill, you ring each and every bell until you reach the mouth of the dragon. Once you enter the dragon, you're in yet another cave. Through a set of stairs, you eventually emerge on top of the hill, accompanied by a golden stupa and a magnificent view over the River Kwai. But the most prominent one has to be the Tiger Cave Temple, situated on top of a large hill in the middle of thousands of rice paddies. Here you can see a giant Buddha made of pure gold that is over 10 stories tall. As you pray, you can use the free lotus as your tool to obtain your blessings. And there are monks who are more than happy to help you reach nirvana easier with a simple ritual. And needless to say, the view on top of the pagodas over the rice paddies were absolutely amazing. After taking in the gorgeous views, why don't we take in some equally gorgeous calories? And don't you fret, there are many places around that can suit you just fine. Here is a cafe that has a lotus pond full of blossoming flowers as well as koi fish. And you can see I was a little bit carried away with the props that they offered me. And in the nearby rice paddies, there is a little cafe that specializes in noodles. Let your feet dangle in the air, brushing against the crisp rice leaves. Take a big gulp of the iced coffee and look at the temple right above you. Hearing the distant bell ringing in the sky, there is no better feeling than this. And did you know? Kanchanaburi also has the biggest rain tree in the entire world. Here you can see it sprawling over 100 meters wide, like a giant umbrella offering shade to everything underneath, including me and my newfound friend. After seeing all the major sites in Kanchanaburi, it is time to hop onto the famous Death Railway. I jumped onto the train and let it take me across River Kwai Bridge. And following the rhythm of wheels beating against the tracks, we slowly headed west towards the mountains. And by sunset, we reached the famous Wangfo Viaduct. It is the beginning of the mountain range that divides Thailand with Myanmar. And here, River Kwai cuts deep into the cliffs over 20 meters tall and made the construction of this railroad especially gruesome. Death Railway was ordered by the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II and constructed by prisoners of war from over a dozen Western countries. Thousands and thousands of Americans, Dutch, Australians, and many more were employed during this bloody project. They were only fed one meal a day, had to work 12-hour shifts under the scorching sun, not to mention pages upon pages of atrocious tropical diseases, ranging from cholera, dysentery, all the way to the notorious beriberi disease. By the end of the war, of the 60,000 prisoners of war employed on the railroad, nearly 12,000 died on the railway tracks. And here in Wangfo Viaduct, there was a corpse every 10 centimeters. So these bridges are not only constructed of wood, but actual literal flesh and blood. You can find most of these heroes now buried in the International POW Cemetery in downtown Kanchanaburi. And yet their sacrifice was exploited for something even more sinister. And this is a story that I have to tell you. It was 1942. And Britain was losing control of its colony, Myanmar. The Japanese had already convinced Thailand to capitulate, and they were knocking on Britain's doorsteps. So they called for help, but nobody was able to answer, except China, who was under the leadership of Kuomintang. The President Chiang Kai-shek ordered a 100,000-strong expedition force and gathered in southwest China. The group leading the charge of the expeditionary force was the 200th Regiment. They arrived in the town of Taungoo, 250 kilometers of Yangon, and yet, unbeknownst to them, the Brits had already decided to abandon Myanmar. As the Japanese force marched closer, the 1st British Battalion, which was supposed to defend Taungoo, decided to evacuate, leaving only the 200th Regiment against the Japanese forces. The Japanese needed to capture this town quickly, because they needed to cut off the last remaining land route into China, the Burmese Yunnan Highway, and by doing so, they could completely surround China and force it to surrender. However, to their surprise, the 200th Regiment did not retreat in front of the well-equipped Japanese army nearly 3 times its size, and held their ground for a full 12 days. They ran out of water, they ran out of food, and they ran out of ammo. And thanks to the Death Railway, the Japanese was able to provide fresh reinforcements nearly every day. By the end of the battle, the 200th Regiment broke through the surrounding Japanese army with more than half of its men already dead. And the expedition was a complete failure. Of the 100,000 Chinese troops sent into Myanmar, barely 40,000 made it back to China alive. The rest scattered into India to continue fighting or into the deep jungle of northern Myanmar. A group of 1,500 injured men did not want to be captured, but they did not want to slow down their retreating friends. So they huddled together, doused themselves with gasoline, and lit themselves on fire. And the worst fate was met by the 5th Army, who escaped into the northern Kachin Mountains in remote Myanmar. It is one of the least populated and most remote areas in the entire world. They were lost in the jungle for more than 2 months. By the time they were luckily discovered by an American spy plane, the 40,000 men had already dwindled into 8,000. And many of these troops who did not manage to get back to their motherland in time were unfortunately stranded forever. Because by the time the war was won, Chiang Kai-shek and his Kuomintang power was dwindling. and they eventually lost to the Communist Party led by Mao Zedong. And Mao did not want to accept these military men that swore fealty to Chiang Kai-shek, his mortal enemy. This lone army that some people claim to be 10,000 strong was stranded at the border of remote Myanmar and Thailand for nearly 40 years, and eventually, they just slowly died away. Sadly, Chinese lives are not worth as much as Westerners' lives. There's only this dilapidated old monument in a hidden corner of the city. It served as the gravestone of more than 60,000 nameless troops that got lost in the dense underbush of Myanmar and Thailand. It did not have a beautiful grass lawn or a weekly refreshing of the flowers. And soon, these people will be forever forgotten because Communist China refused to acknowledge their existence, and Taiwan, the remaining province of Republic of China, is too powerless to do anything. So I want to tell you this story to let you remember. There was once this brave army who fought alongside all of the others, but never got to go home. The train slowly stopped at the small village of Nam Tak, at the end of the line. I checked myself into my floating hotel and sat by the River Kwai. This is a river drenched in blood. I could not help but think about all these brave men who sacrificed their lives so their children could have a better one. As I walked underneath the famous San Yok Noi waterfall, I could not help but thank them for what they did for all of us. Without them, we will never have the prosperity and happiness that we get to share today. Even though they will soon be forgotten by history, I will forever be grateful deep down in my heart. And I will try to live the best life I can ever live, so that I will never fail these forefathers. I hope you enjoyed this hidden gem called Kanchanaburi as much as I did. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give this video a big thumbs up, like this friendly sticky rice vendor. And do consider subscribing if you want more contents like this. But before you leave, I want to share something with you that I have cherished ever since my trip to Kanchanaburi. Whenever I find myself deeply troubled or losing faith, I will always remember that poem etched at the lost soldier's grave and remind myself, I'm not only living for myself, I'm also living for them. 渭河水，清也浑，恰如乱世假扮真。大战已定败余胜，谁真英雄且不明。唯我中华远征军，10万将士变孤魂。死无葬身地，白骨化泥尘。功高如天无人问，渭河水。 清也浑，人间恩怨诉不清，青天白日暗垂泪，愧对炎黄子和孙。